There's a quiet sensation many people who grew up in the 1980s recognize. Not panic, not rejection, just a low-level feeling of being slightly out of sync. You look at the world now and it feels unfamiliar. Not hostile, just different. Like the rules changed without an announcement. This isn't about struggling to adapt. Most of you adapted long ago. Jobs changed, technology changed, roles shifted. What feels strange is something else. You remember a pace that no longer exists, a rhythm where time felt heavier, where waiting wasn't a problem to solve. When people younger than you talk about pressure, urgency, or constant input, you understand the words, but the emotional reference point is missing. It's not nostalgia in the romantic sense. It's comparison without intention. Your nervous system was calibrated in a different environment, less watched, less optimized, less immediate. So when today's world feels loud or oddly hollow, it doesn't register as danger. It registers as unfamiliar terrain. And that quiet sense of displacement isn't a flaw, it's a clue. Because this difference didn't appear later in life. It was shaped much earlier. And that difference didn't start in adulthood. Growing up in the 1980s meant something subtle but important. Large parts of your day existed without supervision. Not as neglect, but as normal life. You came home to an empty house, made your own snacks, decided how to spend the afternoon, and learned quickly that no one was going to tell you what to do next. There was no constant checking, no progress tracking, no invisible audience. That kind of childhood quietly trains something internal. You didn't wait for permission to start. You didn't need feedback to continue. Over time, this created an internal compass, a way of deciding, adjusting, and moving forward without external validation. That's why, even now, you're often comfortable acting without reassurance. You don't panic when no one responds. You don't freeze when instructions are unclear. But there's a trade-off most people don't notice. When you're used to relying on yourself early, asking for help later can feel unnecessary or even uncomfortable. Not because you don't need it, but because needing it was never part of the original system. If any of this feels familiar, you're not alone here. And if these patterns resonate, you can quietly stay with the channel, not for answers, but for language that helps you recognize what was already there. Because this early independence didn't just shape how you act, it shaped how you experience effort itself. If this feels familiar, subscribe to the channel. These videos are built for people who notice patterns but rarely hear them named. If you want more clarity without noise, an explanation without judgment, stay here. Because this early independence didn't just shape how you acted, it shaped how effort itself came to feel. Effort worked differently when you were growing up. Wanting something rarely meant getting it immediately. If you wanted a game, you saved money. If you wanted a song, you waited by the radio. If you wanted to watch a movie, you went to the store and hoped it was still there. None of this felt like discipline. It was just how things worked. Over time, your brain learned a quiet equation. Effort came first. Reward came later. And the waiting was part of the value. That pattern shaped how satisfaction feels for you even now. You're often more motivated by the process than the outcome. You can stay focused without constant payoff. Instant rewards don't always register as meaningful, not because they're bad, but because they arrive without a story attached. But there's a cost to this adaptation too. When effort is tied too closely to worth, rest can feel unearned. Enjoyment can feel delayed. You may push longer than necessary, not because you enjoy pressure, but because stopping early feels wrong. This is why modern convenience can feel strangely empty, and why friction sometimes feels more honest. And it also explains something deeper about how you respond to loss and reality itself. You grew up in a world that was physical in ways that are easy to forget now. Objects had weight. Ownership mattered. When something broke, it was gone. When you lost something, it stayed lost. There was no backup, no cloud, no quiet undo button. This trained a specific kind of confidence, not bravado, but familiarity with consequence. You learned early that actions had permanent results and that you could live with them. You navigated the world without GPS, without instant answers, and without anyone tracking your location. When you were unsure, you figured it out because you had to. Over time, this created trust in your ability to handle real situations, not abstract ones. You don't collapse when systems fail. You don't panic when plans fall apart. But this confidence has a limit. When everything feels too virtual, too reversible, or too abstract, engagement can drop. It's not resistance, it's disconnection. And that difference becomes most visible when pressure enters the room. Pressure doesn't register the same way for you. When situations become unstable, many people look for reassurance, direction, or immediate support. You tend to get quieter instead. Not because you don't feel stress, but because your first instinct is to assess, not react. Growing up, problems were often solved alone, in real time, without guidance. So calm under pressure isn't a personality trait. It's a learned response. You're comfortable sitting inside uncertainty without rushing to escape it. But this adaptation has a cost that often goes unnoticed. When you stay composed, others may assume you're unaffected. When you don't ask for help, support doesn't arrive. Over time, emotional strain can stay internal, unmanaged, and invisible. You handle crises well, but everyday vulnerability can feel harder to express. This is why people sometimes misread your calm as emotional distance, and why resilience in your case doesn't always feel as strong as it looks. Which brings us to what this way of adapting quietly leaves behind. This way of adapting leaves something behind. When you learn early that you can handle things on your own, needing support can start to feel unnecessary or even uncomfortable. Not because you don't value connection, but because independence became your default setting. Over time, this can create a quiet distance. You may listen well, stay steady, and show up when it matters, yet struggle to let others see uncertainty in real time. Emotional needs don't disappear, they just get postponed. And postponed needs don't ask loudly. They wait. This doesn't mean something went wrong. It means the system you learned was optimized for self-containment, not shared processing. In a world that now rewards visibility, sharing, and constant emotional signaling, this can feel like a mismatch. You're not avoiding closeness. You're simply used to carrying weight internally. And that habit made sense once. But it also explains why the present can feel oddly exhausting, even when nothing is technically wrong. Which leads directly to why the modern world often feels harder to engage with than it looks. The modern world runs on a different rhythm. Attention is fragmented, experiences are shared while they're still happening, and value is often measured by visibility rather than depth. For someone shaped in a slower, more contained environment, this can feel disorienting, not threatening, just unfamiliar. You may find yourself less interested in constant updates, less responsive to digital urgency, and less motivated by online affirmation. This isn't resistance to change. It's a difference in calibration. Your sense of presence was formed before everything became content. Moments were lived once, not optimized or replayed. That makes today's pace feel lighter, but also thinner, faster, but less anchored. Engagement doesn't fail because you can't keep up. It fades because the system asks for a type of participation that doesn't match how your attention was trained. And this gap doesn't mean you belong in the past. It simply means the world moved into a mode your nervous system didn't evolve alongside. Which brings us to the final reframe that ties everything together. Every generation is shaped by the environment it learns to trust. What you carry isn't superiority or nostalgia. It's a set of adaptations that made sense in a different system. A world that was slower, more physical, and less mediated trained attention, patience, and self-reliance in specific ways. Those traits still function. They just don't always get recognized in the current environment. This doesn't mean you're outdated. It also doesn't mean the present is broken. It means the world shifted faster than certain nervous systems were designed to follow. And that gap creates friction, not failure. You don't need to force alignment or resist change. Understanding the origin of your responses is enough. When you stop interpreting difference as deficiency, the sense of displacement softens. Not because the world becomes quieter, but because your internal frame becomes clearer. And clarity, more than comfort, is what allows adaptation to happen naturally.